Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the powdery, perfumed, and slightly top-heavy world of 18th century French aristocracy. A place where appearances weren't just everything, they were taller than everything. Picture this, you're walking into a glittering ballroom lit by chandeliers the size of small ships, and the first thing you notice isn't the gold trim, the orchestra, or the mountain of candied fruit piled on a mirrored table. No, you notice the wigs. They rise like silver-capped trees, swaying gently with every motion. Some are shaped like ships. Others are layered with tiny porcelain birds. You see powdered towers that would block the sun if the ceiling weren't painted with cherubs. And beneath each wig, a powdered face smiles or sneers or pretends not to notice they're essentially balancing a bakery display on their head. You probably won't survive this. Not from scandal or scorn, though both are plentiful, but from the sheer weight of the absurdity we're about to explore. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these weird and wonderful stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your stroll through this ballroom of hair with a cautious footstep. It's not just the marble floors that make you careful. It's the knowledge that if you bump into someone's hairstyle, you might cause a chain reaction of powdered avalanches. This is Versailles, or a place very much like it. The air is heavy with perfume mixed with a hint of roasted chestnuts and floral wax. Gentle harp music hums in the background. And towering above every conversation is an ecosystem of artificial hair coated in powder, sprayed with violet water, and possibly concealing a few uninvited insects. The year is somewhere between 1750 and 1785, the golden age of ridiculous wigs. The aristocracy is deep in the business of performance. And nothing says I am more important than you, like the volume, height, and absurd complexity of what's perched on your head. You pass a duchess with a wig shaped like a Grecian temple. A marquis nearby balances a tri-tiered confection adorned with silk ribbon and two tiny flags. These aren't just fashion statements, they're status symbols. The taller the wig, the closer to, well, maybe not God, but certainly the king's attention. Historians still argue whether the extreme wig craze began as a genuine aesthetic movement or as a satirical response to the court's obsession with appearances. Some say Louis XIV's own insecurity about balding helped launch the fashion. Others think the towering styles were born from a need to outshine the competition literally. You weave your way between groups of nobles who all pretend not to notice one another's hair while very much noticing. Conversations drift like powdered feathers, debates about court gossip, inheritance, embroidery, and which wig powder gives the best moonlit ivory effect under candlelight. There's a servant in the corner. He's walking carefully, carrying a silver tray of brandied fruit, and ducking instinctively beneath every coiffed structure. You notice he wears no wig, no powder, just practical hair tied back with a simple ribbon. He might be the only person in the room who could walk through a doorframe unassisted. As you pass a mirror, gilt-edged, of course, you catch your reflection. Your hair looks woefully underwhelming. No crest, no powdered height, no birdcage. But that's okay. You're here to observe, to drift. You pause beside a particularly still figure, a gentleman in a vermilion waistcoat who appears to be asleep standing up. On his head rests a wig so large and stiff it might be holding him upright. A small satin bow sits at the center of the wig's base, perhaps to distract from the fact that he hasn't blinked in a full minute. You continue your walk and realize something subtle but strange. No one is laughing. These wigs, despite their architectural absurdity, are taken very seriously. Each hair is curled, powdered, and placed with intention. Even the ridiculous has its rules here. Later, this same ballroom will host a masked ball where someone's wig catches fire from a nearby candelabra. No one will admit whose it was, but the story will circle Paris for months. But for now, the wigs are still regal, ridiculous. And as you take one final glance around the room, you understand the real magic of the scene. This isn't just fashion, it's theater. Every person here is both actor and audience. Every wig is a monologue written in horsehair and dust. And somewhere beneath all the flower and ribbons are heads that may never again feel the breeze. You step out of the ballroom and into a cooler corridor The change in air hitting your face like a polite slap with a silk glove. The hallway is quieter, lined with portraits of earlier nobles, less powdered, less flamboyant, but still staring with that unwavering 18th century intensity that suggests judgment even in silence. Their wigs are shorter, modest even, a different age, a gentler wig. And that's where we begin tonight's history lesson with the birth of the big wig. And yes, that phrase is where the modern slang comes from. It wasn't always this way. In the 1600s, wigs were largely practical. They were worn to cover baldness, often caused by age disease or, you guessed it, lice. The French court under Louis XIII introduced them as a convenient and hygienic way to maintain appearances. Hair loss was not uncommon among nobility, and instead of quietly accepting it, they did what nobles do best: they paid someone else to make it look fabulous. At first, the wigs were simple: shoulder length, curled at the ends, mostly human hair, sometimes horse or goat, and usually a little itchy. You walk now into a small sitting room where an early wig is being styled on a mannequin head, no taller than the average haircut, no powdered flowers or satin birds, just thick dark curls twisted with care. You crouch beside the wig stand and run your fingers along the worn oak, feeling the divots left by decades of metal pins and combs. This is where it started, where hair ended and artifice began. Then came Louis XIV, the Sun King. He was the tipping point. Louis XIV, with his divine sense of drama and utter refusal to be ignored, began wearing increasingly elaborate wigs, long cascading locks styled into flowing waterfalls of hair that framed his face like a lion's mane. This wasn't just fashion. It was power geometry. The bigger the hair, the bigger the king. Historians still argue whether Louis's preference for massive wigs came from vanity theatricality or a conscious strategy to physically elevate himself above his nobles literally. Some say it was inspired by Roman busts. Others believe it was simply an extension of the Sun King's aesthetic philosophy: more is more. Regardless of motive, the nobles followed suit. You walk into another chamber, this one filled with wig stands in various states of readiness. Some have half-curled locks still drying, others are pinned with labeled ribbons. Tuesday, court midday, chess evening. Supper with the Viscount. Each wig is slightly more voluminous than the last. The effect is something between a hair salon and a shrine. At this point, wigs were a full-time job. Not just to wear, but to have. You didn't just own a wig. You employed a wig servant, often referred to as a perruquier, whose entire professional identity revolved around your scalp's reputation. There's one in the room now, kneeling beside a lady's wig stand, armed with tongs and a small pot of lard-based pomade. He hums as he works, carefully curling each lock like he's sculpting a swan out of soap. The result is a wig so lofty it would need its own coach if it ever wished to travel. You watch as a powdered noblewoman steps in to inspect his work. She tilts her head to assess the symmetry, then nods approvingly before leaving the room with a flourish. The wig won't be worn until evening, but it must be perfect by noon. And so the wigs grew taller, from shoulder length to chest length, from gentle curls to spiraling towers. Powder was introduced not just for color, but for consistency. White powder became fashionable, then gray lavender, even pale blue for themed events. And as the wigs soared higher, the people beneath them became more grounded in etiquette, in rank and ritual. This wasn't hair anymore. It was architecture. You walk now into a gallery where early wig designs are sketched in delicate ink-side profiles showing not faces, but silhouettes of hair-rounded domes, vertical swirls sometimes with labeled inserts showing where secret messages could be stored. A few include diagrams for hidden combs, retractable fans, or even discreet pockets for love notes. One sketch labeled "For Royal Assembly." Maximum impressiveness has a red arrow showing where to insert a small caged canary. Yes, that happened, briefly and poorly. But that's for later. Right now, you rest your hand on the edge of a tall, varnished wig stand and realize it's nearly your height. And you understand in this world importance was not just spoken, it was stacked. You follow the corridor deeper into the palace, shoes tapping softly against smooth marble. The air smells faintly of starch and citrus pomade, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the echo of high heels clicking with intent. You've seen the wigs. You've seen their birth. But now it's time to witness their battles, not with blades or bullets, but with bouffants and pompadours. Because in this age, wigs didn't just grow, they competed. You turn a corner and step into a long gallery lined with mirrors and gilded chairs. At first glance, it looks like any other royal salon. But take a closer look, these aren't just nobles sipping tea. They're watching each other, measuring, calculating. And all the numbers add up to one thing: height. Two duchesses stand in profile near the far window. One wears a powdered tower of curls crowned with porcelain roses. The other sports a sculpted plume resembling a marble spiral staircase. Neither speaks. Their eyes meet briefly in the mirror. Then they smile politely, murderously. This is wig warfare, subtle, perfumed, relentless. The higher the wig, the higher the status. The more absurd the silhouette, the more whispers it could command. Courtiers would arrive at gatherings hours early just to claim corner spots where their wigs wouldn't be crushed by others. Some rooms had custom seating arranged in height-based tiers. The shortest sat closest to the door, the tallest positioned for maximum exposure. You take a seat along the wall beside a valet holding a velvet hat box. He opens it briefly to reveal the cargo, a wig shaped like an ocean wave with actual shells sewn along the sides. It's for the Duchess of Florian, scheduled to enter the room in 20 minutes. He looks proud, a little afraid. Historians still argue whether the competition reached its peak in the early 1770s or slightly later, just before the Revolution. Some say it started as a fad, then escalated into an arms race of absurdity. Others believe it was a calculated distraction, a way for nobles to maintain appearances while the ground beneath them trembled with unrest. Either way, the results were spectacular. You witness a woman enter, now wearing what can only be described as a portrait gallery. On her head, miniature frames depicting family members arranged around her curls like an ancestral crown. One of them tilts slightly as she walks. She pauses, adjusts it with a jeweled pin, then proceeds without flinching. In another corner, a young marquis struggles to maintain posture under the weight of what appears to be a miniature farm scene. A sheep figurine teeters dangerously near the edge. He winces every time someone breathes too hard. There are rules, of course, always rules. For example, one must never outwig a royal unless you're trying to send a message. In 1774, a countess was reportedly exiled from court for arriving at a gala with a wig 4 inches taller than Marie Antoinette's. Whether it was intentional or a tragic miscalculation of wig scaffolding remains unclear. You walk past a pair of gossiping courtiers who whisper in arched tones. She added another inch this week. Yes, and she swears it's all her own horsehair. They giggle behind fans, but the sting is real. You see, wigs weren't just decorations, they were conversations, walking arguments, posture-based protests. Every lock curled just so was a flex, a rumor, a veiled insult wrapped in flour and lavender oil. And then came the accessories. You pause before a stand displaying a sample of wig ornaments. There's a gilded birdcage, a tiny windmill with spinning blades, a porcelain cherub playing a flute, and an actual working clock, its hands ticking faintly. These were not fantasy items. These were worn. In public. On people's heads. You stare at the clock, wondering if it kept time or was merely meant to suggest the wearer had plenty of it. Some wigs came with built-in storage, small compartments hidden beneath curls for trinkets, powders, or folded love notes. One famous example included a secret drawer containing a tiny locket and a miniature snuff box. Romantic, absolutely. Practical, debatable. You exit the gallery and find yourself in a smaller room lined with benches and hat boxes. A footman crouches beside a wig stand, reapplying powder with a soft brush. The wig towers 3 feet above the bench, its outline resembling a Gothic cathedral. You wonder how someone walks through a door with that. The answer: they didn't. Some door frames had to be modified. Others were entered sideways with a practiced bend of the knees and a back scoot perfected through repetition. One duchess famously refused to attend court functions unless ceiling accommodations were guaranteed. You walk once more through a corridor of mirrors where the wigs sway gently like a field of snowy wheat. And somewhere in that hypnotic rhythm you feel it. These weren't just fashion statements. They were weapons. You exit the mirror-lined corridor and step into what feels like a backstage chamber of a grand, very hairy opera. The walls are lined with towering shapes draped in silk veils. Some resemble spiraling towers, others squat domes or architectural wonders that could easily be mistaken for miniature pavilions. But they're not sculptures or art pieces. These are wig stands, and they're not for display. They're for support. Support for wigs so tall, so elaborate, so implausibly constructed they couldn't survive a moment upright without engineering assistance. Welcome to the wig stand arms race. You walk past a row of stands, each a little taller than the last. The earliest are simple wooden busts, no more than shoulder height. But then, gradually, they rise, some reaching 5 feet, others 6 and 1, with a brass nameplate proudly declaring for the Duchess of Arcy 1782, height 7'1". Yes, the stand is taller than she is. And no, it's not a joke. In these rarefied circles, the wig did not belong crumpled in a box or slumped on a shelf. It required a pedestal, one that not only supported its structure, but displayed its majesty, like a crown, like a deity, like an heirloom loaf of bread you can never eat but must worship. You pause beside one particularly Baroque stand, carved from mahogany, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and painted gold leaf. Its base is bolted to a wheeled platform likely to allow safe transportation from bedchamber to salon without risking collapse. On top rests a wig styled into a literal model of Versailles, complete with topiary and gravel paths woven from powdered gray horsehair. Historians still argue whether wig stands evolved for preservation, presentation, or pure theater. Some suggest they were necessary to maintain the wig's structural integrity after hours of styling. Others argue they were part of the visual hierarchy. Your wig wasn't truly finished until it stood above you, even in rest. You pass a servant polishing a wig stand with a soft cloth and murmuring to himself. He steps aside respectfully as you approach a wall-sized cabinet filled with miniature stands, test versions made by apprentice wig makers to practice shaping without wasting valuable hair. The whole scene feels more like a cathedral than a closet. The stands themselves became expressions of wealth, crafted from rare woods, lacquered in layers, cushioned with silk, and sometimes scented with sachets tucked inside the base. One duchess insisted hers be perfumed with pressed lilacs to keep the imagination afloat. You wander into a narrow side room where a master wigmaker works quietly beneath candlelight. His tools are neatly arranged: curling irons, ribbon spools, silver tongs, and powdered chalk in porcelain jars. On the workbench rests a partly assembled wig, a gleaming dome of powdered gray, rising on a stand with spiral columns. He doesn't acknowledge you. He's deep in the physics of elegance, measuring angles, adjusting wire supports, and muttering about humidity like a man trying to hang cloud formations on scaffolding. You move closer and notice the internal structure, a lattice of whalebone and ribbon designed to keep the shape aloft. Without it, the whole creation would collapse under its own grandeur like a soufflé scorned by the gods. Of course, all of this required storage, which meant wig closets. Yes, those existed. You step into one now, a narrow chamber lined with vertical cubbies, each containing a labeled wig on a personalized stand. Like books in a private library, each is arranged by purpose: theater, funeral, boating, flirtation, spring, and the ever-ambitious opera box tier 1. One cubby is empty except for a note with the valet, rehearsal powdering. And then you reach the royal section. Here the wig stands become sculptures, carved with crests, draped in fine velvet. One even rotates, activated by a slow-turning crank, revealing the wig's full 360-degree splendor. You resist the urge to applaud. There's a rumor you recall about a certain comtesse who commissioned a wig so tall it had to be constructed directly onto its stand over the course of 5 days. She allegedly had to eat soup through a long straw and sleep sitting upright until it was finally ready to be revealed. Did it win her the king's attention? For exactly 3 minutes, yes. Until someone else arrived wearing a live dove release mechanism. You turn a corner and find one final display. A wig stand made entirely of glass. Delicate, pristine, utterly impractical. The note beside it reads, "Never used, merely admired." You stand quietly, letting the absurd reverence wash over you. Because here's the thing, the wig stands weren't just accessories. They were thrones. And sometimes, the thing resting on them wielded more power than the person who wore it. You slip through a velvet curtain into a warm, lamplit room filled with steam, the scent of lavender water and burnt starch tickling your nose. This is no ballroom, no gallery. It's quieter, busier. A space where elegance is engineered daily, with the same intensity as a military campaign. Welcome to the inner sanctum of the French elite, a day in the life of a wig. The room is bustling. Servants move briskly, balancing porcelain bowls of hot water brushes and curious implements that look like gardening tools repurposed for a dollhouse. One woman, likely a maid of high seniority, is hunched over a wig stand, gently patting powder onto a dome of curls with a folded linen pad. She's not just styling, she's orchestrating. You find a bench near the wall and observe. A valet opens a long cedar drawer containing rows of tiny labeled tins: lilac starch, lead white rose dust, ash gray morning. Another unpacks a box of miniature curling tongs and lays them out like surgical instruments. The air crackles softly with heat, hiss, and a few muttered expletives in Old French. It starts as most things do, with washing, though not in the way you might expect. Wigs weren't washed often. That would ruin the structure and weaken the horsehair. Instead, they were scraped gently with a dull knife, then brushed vigorously to remove dust, sweat, and the occasional lost canapé crumb. Then came the pomading. You watch as one servant mixes a concoction of bear grease and beeswax, stirring slowly while adding lavender oil. This will be massaged into the wig to maintain hold and shine. A nauseating job, but absolutely vital. Pomade gave the wig its weight, its character, and unfortunately, its distinctive scent. Once greased, the curls are wrapped around tiny wooden rods bound with string and placed under heated copper pans. The goal, perfect spirals, not one out of place. This was hair as geometry, with more math than most noblemen ever mastered. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were more for personal hygiene or public display. Some claim the scent-masking properties were essential in an age where bathing was rare. Others believe the smell, the shape, and the stiffness were all part of an unspoken language, a daily performance of refinement. The next step is powdering. You observe as an assistant brings out a tall, fluted cone made of gauze and ribbon. It fits over the wig like a hood. Into this powdered starch, dyed pale gray or bluish white, is gently puffed through a narrow silver pipe. The wig disappears in a delicate cloud, emerging moments later, looking like a dessert under winter snow. But the process doesn't end there. You move to another workstation where accessories are being pinned: ribbons, feathers, velvet bands, small jewelry pieces. Today's wig will feature 3 hand-embroidered birds and a single silk rosebud placed just behind the left ear. Tomorrow's you over here will have a miniature fan that actually opens. One of the wig servants sneezes. A puff of powder fills the air, settling on everyone's shoulders like sleepy ash. No one reacts. This is just part of the job. You glance toward a checklist pinned to the wall. Brush base structure. Apply oil balm. Curl all front-facing spirals. Match theme to sleeve embroidery. Triple check symmetry under candlelight. There's something almost military about it. Precision, repetition. Wigs weren't spontaneous, they were orchestrated, rebuilt from scratch each morning. And while their owners lounged in robes sipping chocolate, the wig teams worked like artisans. Or field surgeons. In a far corner, you spot a prototype wig being tested. It's enormous, almost comically so. A footman turns slowly in place, wobbling under the load, while another records notes in a leather-bound book. "Too left heavy," he murmurs. "Needs center reinforcement near Swan's beak." You don't ask, because honestly you're afraid of the answer. You exit into a smaller chamber where completed wigs are displayed on stands ready for delivery. They gleam under soft candlelight, snowy, symmetrical, so precisely arranged they could pass for iced confections. Each has a name card. Not for the wig, mind you, for the occasion it's meant to attend. Ambassador's Luncheon. Vespers at Saint-Honoré. Garden Duel Spectator. You pause before one styled with a gentle cascade of curls tied with a teal satin bow. No birds, no gadgets, just balance. It feels almost intimate, like the wig equivalent of a quiet walk alone. And then just before you leave, you notice a small sign by the door. Wigs are not to be worn outdoors during wind unless accompanied by 2 assistants and a strap. Of course. You smile, because this wasn't just hair. It was daily sculpture, designed in silence, constructed with care, and gone by bedtime only to be rebuilt again like a powdered phoenix rising from the pomade. The hallway opens into a long gallery of portraits. Not massive oil paintings, but something more intimate pastel sketches and miniature cameos, each encased in delicate gilded frames no larger than your hand. And yet each face stares out with the same cool precision chin, lifted eyes forward, and of course, an elaborately styled wig perched like a coated crown. You begin to see it now more clearly than ever before. These weren't just hairstyles. These wigs were messages. Silent declarations sent across room salons and court gatherings without a single word. Today, we're decoding the hidden language of wig heights, widths, shapes, and flourishes. Because in 18th century France, your hair didn't just reflect fashion. It revealed your rank, your intent, your political leanings, and occasionally whether you were about to poison someone's wine. You stop in front of a portrait of a woman with an impossibly tall coiffure, the top crowned with 3 ostrich feathers, and a woven ribbon in the royal blue of the Bourbons. Her cheeks are lightly rouged, her expression unreadable. But her wig. It's shouting. This was court code. The height alone tells you she's not only wealthy, she's well-connected. The blue ribbon whispers of loyalty to the crown. The triple feather formation implies influence in Versailles' inner circles. That entire vertical situation is basically saying, don't speak to me unless you have at least a title and 2 estates. You move down the line, passing faces, frozen and powdered declaration. A man with modest curls and no powder, probably a reformer. Maybe even a closet supporter of Enlightenment values. A woman with tiny silver bells, hidden in her back ringlets, possibly signaling availability, or at least flirtation, at Thursday's supper. Historians still argue whether these styles were deliberately coded, or if we're reading too much into what was simply fashionable. But in a world where every gesture was a performance, it's hard to imagine they didn't know exactly what they were doing. You wander into a salon set up with mannequins wearing replica wigs labeled by social class. The difference is striking. The petite noblesse wears shoulder-length curls, modestly dusted in off-white, with a simple silk ribbon. The haute noblesse, a monument of frosted spirals, trailing tulle, and fabric roses so lifelike you're surprised they don't wilt under candle heat. A footman in one display holds a tray of spare ribbons, powdered puffs, and decorative pins. His expression is blank, but the angle of his shoulders suggests he's carrying far more than accessories. He's managing image. You turn toward a window and see your reflection caught in the glass, your own hair wildly unstructured compared to the architectural marvels around you. You smile. You'd be scandalously underdressed here, and not just because of your shoes. Further along, a section of the salon is dedicated to theme wigs, those designed to reflect current events. You read their descriptions aloud softly. La Victoire Navale, the naval victory sculpted to resemble a ship in full sail complete with rigging. La Paix Intérieure. The inner piece, a low, gently waved style with lavender sprigs meant to show moral seriousness. La Récolte Royale, the royal harvest featuring woven wheat stalks, a nod to generous crops and feigned empathy with the peasantry. Each one a walking headline. One particularly infamous wig is displayed behind glass, labeled Le Plaisir de la Liberté. It was reportedly worn by a lady of the court just weeks before the revolution began. It includes red, white, and blue feathers and a tiny figurine of a broken chain. Whether it was a brave statement or a fashion faux pas is unclear. Either way, she was never seen again. Somewhere behind you, a musician begins to play a soft minuet on a viol. The sound drifts through the wigs like wind in a forest, delicate, layered, and just a little artificial. You come to a final portrait, this one sketched hastily in pencil. It shows a young woman adjusting her wig in a mirror, eyes cast downward, expression uncertain. The curls are perfect, the ribbons flawless. But there's something fragile about the image. And you realize, for all their grandeur, these wigs were vulnerable. One gust of wind, one misstep, one broken clasp, and the entire facade could collapse. These silent statements were as precarious as the world that wore them. And yet even now, centuries later, we still read them, still decode, still marvel. Because hair might grow back. But messages, especially powdered, perfumed, gravity-defying ones, have a way of lingering. You pass through a narrow archway and into a low-ceilinged chamber lit with warm candlelight, the flames flickering in polished brass sconces. The smell shifts less floral now, more like scorched wool and curling iron smoke. The floorboards creak beneath your feet, and for a moment you feel like you've entered not a salon but a workshop. And that's exactly what it is. This is where the real magic happened, not in the mirrored boudoirs of Versailles, but in the cluttered, chaotic sanctuaries of the wigmakers or perruquiers. The artisans behind every towering statement, every powdered poem and hair. You spot one now hunched over a work table. His coat sleeves are rolled up. A pencil rests behind one ear. His fingers move quickly, deftly, weaving strands of stiff horsehair into a wire frame as naturally as if he were lacing his boots. He doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. His work is part intuition, part science, part prayer. Nearby, another wig maker stirs a bubbling pot of glue, an unpleasant mix of boiled-down animal parts, used to hold the most unruly curls in place. The steam rises thick and sour. He doesn't flinch. This is the smell of progress. These workshops were often hidden behind the finest salons, discreetly tucked away, so that the nobility could pretend their wigs simply materialized. But they didn't. They were built. With sweat. With sharp tools. With calloused hands. You wander through aisles of shelves stacked with curls, coils, braids, and bows, sorted by color texture and desired elevation. There's an entire rack labeled flirtatious left-side twists, and another tagged crisis waves tall pre-revolution. Someone clearly has a sense of humor. Historians still argue whether wig makers considered themselves artisans or laborers. Some signed their work branding their creations with discreet tags. Others preferred anonymity, slipping through back exits, while their wigs danced in royal ballrooms above the heads of people who never knew their names. But make no mistake, these people were engineers. The wigs they constructed had to be lightweight, yet imposing, durable, yet delicate. A single misaligned support could cause a collapse mid-curtsy. One unbalanced ringlet could ruin a silhouette. You stop at a central work table where an apprentice is painstakingly assembling what appears to be a hunting scene complete with tiny hounds leaping through powdered hedges sculpted from twisted silk. He looks up briefly and smiles as if to say, "Don't worry. It'll fit, I think." Behind him, wig forms stretch along the wall. Some small and simple, others shaped like turrets or spires. The labels make you blink. Lady Desormeau's Midnight Garden needs reinforcement. Marchioness Duvernay's astronomy lecture, owl accessory pending. Secret message, wig no one tell Jacques. One of the wig makers is threading a fine silver chain through a braid part, jewelry part, structural support. You're not sure if it's to dazzle or just to keep the whole thing from folding in half during a dramatic nod. There's a particularly large design resting on a velvet cushion near the corner. It's unfinished but already remarkable. The base is wound with cascading layers of black and gray curls, while the top features a miniature stage, a wooden platform, complete with curtains and tiny papier-mâché actors. It's labeled simply Theater Wig. You imagine wearing it. The dizziness, the height, the pride, and maybe a bit of panic. The wig maker beside it wipes his brow, sets down a pair of shears, and steps back to admire his creation like an architect inspecting a cathedral. And really, that's not far off. You notice a small ledger open on his table filled with sketch after sketch of past commissions. One page is labeled Rejected Ideas and includes wig with built-in fan, self-powdering wig too messy, caged finch escaped mid-performance, twin wig double date structure, unspeakable collapse. Some experiments went better than others. You exit the workshop and find yourself in a cool hallway away from the heat and glue, the powder and risk. But you can still feel it, the hum of creation. The hush before a grand entrance. The nervous energy of something silly becoming sacred through craftsmanship. Because beneath every towering display of powdered status, there was a tired artisan with burnt fingertips and a vision. Someone whose genius never entered the history books, but whose hair structures did. And maybe, just maybe, they knew that while the heads came and went, the wigs, they would live forever. The air shifts again as you leave the workshop behind. The walls are darker now, wood-paneled and closer together. The mood changes too. Gone is the quiet admiration for artistry. In its place, you feel a rising sense of anticipation, and just a hint of dread. Because for all their majesty, wigs had a dark side, a dangerous side. Tonight, you're going to witness what happened when elegance collided with gravity-open flames and poor architectural planning. Welcome to the realm of disasters on the dance floor. You descend a spiral staircase and find yourself in a grand ballroom, familiar, but this time the energy is a little more precarious. The chandeliers are hung low. The ceiling's not built with 7-foot headgear in mind, arch threateningly. And the crowd, oh, they're nervous. Or maybe it's just the hair talking. You spot a lady trying to enter the room through the main door. She ducks slightly, angles her head sideways, and squeezes through with an audible crunch of feathers and starch. A small piece of lace detaches from her coiffure and drifts to the floor like a powdered snowflake. She doesn't notice, or refuses to notice. Either is valid. You station yourself by a column and watch. At first it all proceeds as expected. Couples dance, fans flutter, eyebrows arch, but then it begins. A gentleman's wig weighted with too many clockwork details begins to tilt. He doesn't feel it, not yet. But the tilt grows, slowly, surely, until finally thwump it slides sideways into his dance partner's shoulder like a soft, perfumed battering ram. She gasps. A ripple goes through the room. Another disaster brews near the musicians. A cellist playing too close to a lady with a particularly flammable floral arrangement watches in horror as her wig drifts dangerously near the candelabra. A servant swoops in at the last second with a fan and wafts the flame away, probably saving the entire ballroom from instant immolation. You chuckle, because for all their elegance, these wigs were liabilities. Tall ones. Historians still argue whether these accidents were rare, exaggerated by satire, or tragically underreported. Some say the stories of wigs collapsing mid-curtsy or catching fire were mostly gossip. Others insist they were all too real and a source of endless anxiety for anyone foolish enough to dance under candlelight. You drift toward the refreshments table where a footman stands beside a silver tray of delicately molded jellies. His eyes keep flicking upward toward a nearby marquise whose wig is swaying gently like a weather vane in high wind. He doesn't say anything, but you can tell he's calculating the nearest bucket of water. There are other hazards. You overhear two women in conversation. One complains that her wig gave her a headache so intense she thought her soul was trying to escape through her temples. The other nods sympathetically and confides that she once had to lean against a statue for an hour after her hair cage gave out. Some wigs were so heavy they caused neck strain. Others interfered with vision, prompting more than one noble to miss a stair and descend headfirst into a hedgehog-shaped centerpiece. One duchess reportedly blamed her miscarriage on an overly tight hair structure, compressing her circulation. No one dared argue. And yet, they kept wearing them. Because the alternative, showing up in a modest wig or worse natural hair, was unthinkable. To be plain-headed in the court of Versailles was like arriving to a masquerade without a mask. Social death, possibly worse. You move closer to the musicians and notice a harpist clearly frustrated brushing powdered fluff off his strings after every song. He mutters something in Old French that sounds suspiciously like "I didn't train for this." There's a sudden thud, a gasp, heads turn. One gentleman attempting an ambitious bow has miscalculated the weight of his dual-tiered wig and tipped forward into a potted tree. His valet rushes in with a handkerchief, helping him to his feet with practiced ease. No one mocks him openly, but fans flutter. Eyebrows raise. The damage is done. You find a quiet spot near the back and watch the dance continue, slow, stiff, and full of polite terror. It's like watching an elaborate architectural pageant where every participant is one misstep away from structural failure. And yet it's beautiful, in its own terrifying way. There's something undeniably noble about the commitment. The sheer willpower it takes to move gracefully under a powdered tower built with glue and hope. These people weren't just dancing, they were balancing entire philosophies on their heads. Dignity, vanity, survival. And as you watch another wig sway correct and stabilize just in time for the next minuet, you think to yourself, this is more than fashion. It's engineering under pressure. The music fades behind you, replaced by the soft hush of carpeted footsteps and distant laughter echoing off painted ceilings. You're walking now into a more private space away from the crush of powdered elegance and into the sanctum where those towering wigs, those sculpted monuments to status, were kept when not in use. This is not just a dressing room. This is where Wig-Stands became altars. You step into a boudoir belonging perhaps to a duchess or someone just as dangerously fashionable. The room is plush with rose-colored velvet. A faint scent of jasmine hangs in the air, mixed with beeswax polish and old perfume. Mirrors stand in corners reflecting versions of you don't quite recognize. And all around you, in quiet reverence, stand the wig thrones. Tall ones, thin ones, wide-arched, scroll-legged, carved like Gothic pulpits or Grecian columns. Some are inlaid with tiny mother-of-pearl flowers. One is gilded from top to base and bears a small plaque for morning conversations only. Each wig rests delicately upon its throne, not flopped or folded or forgotten, but posed, displayed, as if it were royalty in repose. These were art objects in their own right. You pause beside one stand fashioned from dark walnut crowned with a velvet cushion embroidered in golden thread. The wig perched atop it is impossibly graceful, simple spirals layered like petals. A ribbon trails down the back like a whispered secret. To the aristocracy, it wasn't enough to own elaborate wigs. One had to house them. The wig stand wasn't just storage, it was presentation. The hairpiece once removed didn't get hidden away. It became the room's focal point, like a portrait or a prized vase. Guests would admire it. Servants would polish it. One might even write poetry beside it, drawing inspiration from its symmetry. Historians still debate whether these displays were meant purely for vanity or if they served a deeper social function. Some suggest it was a way of claiming identity, of reminding visitors that the wearer was someone. Others say it was just indulgence. Beautiful, powder-scented indulgence. You sit on a settee facing a trio of wig stands, each positioned at slightly different angles, like a group portrait. You can almost hear them murmuring, "I was worn to the prince's masquerade. I held steady through a thunderstorm. I hosted a miniature windmill and I did not spin." One particularly striking stand resembles a small armoire complete with locking doors and padded lining. You open it gently. Inside rests a pale lavender wig trimmed with seed pearls, each curl arranged with surgical precision. It looks as though it was removed just moments ago, though the tag tied to it reads, Fête de la Lune, 1779. That wig hasn't danced in decades, and yet it waits. In another corner, you find a row of small shelves, each holding accessories, used to maintain the wig's structure and grandeur. Combs made from bone ribbon spools. Ivory powder boxes and tiny bronze cranes used to suspend the more ambitious styles when not in use. One shelf bears a handwritten note. "Do not lean on this side. Duchess's wig is drying." You chuckle softly. Because yes, wigs were washed, occasionally, painfully. And when they were perched like fragile sculptures drying slowly in their glory atop pedestals, made not for convenience, but for worship. One wall features tiny portraits of wigs themselves, little ink drawings and watercolor sketches. Not of the wearers, of the hair, rendered like botanical studies. Some labeled in calligraphy, La Cascade Douce, La Marée Royale, Le Coeur de Coquette. This wasn't vanity anymore, this was devotion. You run your fingers along the edge of a stand shaped like a spiral staircase. Each level supports a smaller wig, a nesting doll of coiffures. It's both absurd and oddly moving, because these wigs weren't just part of fashion. They were icons, and there stands the shrines. Even now, centuries later in a world of closets and plastic hangers, something about the quiet grandeur of these displays holds your gaze. You wonder what it would feel like to live in a time when a hairstyle didn't just complete an outfit, it announced your existence. You take one last look at the gallery of wig thrones. They stand motionless, softly lit, awaiting the next command. But the war is over. The balls have ended. The feathers have drooped. Still they remain, silent witnesses to an age where height was everything, and hair was the heavens. You step through a narrow side door and descend into a more private, quieter chamber. The shift in atmosphere is immediate, less theatrical, more conspiratorial. The velvet, the lace, the gilded mirror frames, they're still here, but they're muted. And at the center of the room stands a tall brass-handled cabinet with an ominous label carved into the wood above it. Poudres de déclaration. This is where the politics begin. Where identity, ideology, and reputation are carried not in documents or decrees, but in the color and scent of powder. Because believe it or not, wig powder wasn't just for vanity. It was for influence. A sort of olfactory manifesto worn proudly above the eyebrows. You open the cabinet slowly. Inside are dozens of canisters, each ornately labeled Blanc Royaliste, Gris de Salon, Bleu Reformiste, Rose Libertine, Poudre du Matin approved for court use only. Some are faintly scented rosewater lilac bergamot. Others carry sharp, almost medicinal notes. Each was chosen with care and purpose, a statement not only of fashion but of allegiance. You walk past a vanity where a servant carefully dusts a wig with a puff made of rabbit fur. He pauses, squints, then selects a slightly darker powder and begins again. Too pale, he mutters. She'll look like a widow with opinions. Historians still argue whether these powder shades were coded or coincidental. Some believe the nuances were mere affectations, color for color's sake. Others insist that a slight tint difference could signal loyalty, rebellion, or desire. In any case, the powder was noticed, whispered about, measured like whispers in a silent corridor. You lean toward a labeled bottle dust of larkspur, intoxicating when warmed. Next to it sits pearl starch number 3, for use on church days. It's not just about beauty, it's timing. You wouldn't wear a playful scent on a day of mourning. You wouldn't wear a sharp citrus to a night of diplomacy. The wrong powder could mark you as careless, crass, or worse, confused. There's a small book resting on a vanity table, its leather spine cracked from overuse. It's a powder reference manual, each entry describing which shades to use depending on season, event, room temperature, and political climate. An actual entry reads, "If invited to dine with a known sympathizer of the Jansenist persuasion, avoid rose-scented powders. Pale blue lavender will lend neutrality and suggest restrained intellect." You stifle a laugh, but only just. You walk deeper into the room where the walls are lined with perfume cabinets. The bottles shimmer in the candlelight glass cut with star swirls and sunbursts. Many of the scents were designed to blend with wig powder, creating a soft cloud of aroma that lingered wherever one walked. Some nobles carried personal fans to wave their scented hair toward favored guests. One particularly bold duchess was known to accidentally release a cloud of almond-laced powder every time her rival entered the room, prompting sneezes and scandal. You sit beside a small dressing table and pick up a delicate brush. The bristles are lightly dusted with shimmering powder that sparkles like moonlight. A note reads, "New blend best for moonlit gardens and minor flirtations." It's strangely touching how much thought was poured into these details. Because for a society so focused on appearances, the powder was everything. It softened imperfections. It unified rank. It told people who you were, or at least who you pretended to be. One section of the room contains a scandal sheet tacked to the wall like gossip made tangible. At the center, a hastily drawn caricature of a nobleman wearing a wig dusted so thickly with blue-gray powder that it resembles a cloud. The caption reads, "The Comte de Fog blown in from nowhere." You hear quiet laughter behind you. Two maids applying powder to a wig resting on a copper stand. One says, "This one's going to the opera." The other replies, "Then it must smell of wealth, regret, and a hint of danger." They don't even look up, just keep brushing. You notice a narrow drawer beneath the main cabinet. Inside are powder spoons carved from ivory and mother of pearl. Their handles are engraved with initials, personal tools for personal statements. In a world where speech was filtered through etiquette, the scent of your head often said what your voice couldn't. And finally, you see it, a plain wooden box tucked into the far corner, nearly forgotten. Inside, a single sachet labeled only sans nom. No name, no shade, no scent. You lift it gently. The powder is so fine, it disappears on your fingertips. For the wearer who wants to say nothing at all, a power move in its own right. You set it back! Because sometimes silence was the loudest message of all. The corridor beyond the powder room is dimmer now, more narrow. The scent of perfumes fades, replaced by something more electric. The quiet hum of curiosity. The hush that falls in places where secrets gather. Because tonight you're stepping into the strange and softly scandalous world of wig envy and fashion spies. Yes, spies? You see, when hair became architecture and powder became politics, fashion itself transformed into something worth stealing. Wigs were no longer just expressions of status. They were intellectual property. And with that came espionage. You push open a door and step into a small salon bathed in candlelight. The walls are lined with fashion sketches, some loose, some framed, many half-finished like blueprints for something more aerodynamic than decorative. On the floor lies a pile of ribbons and sample fabrics. In the center of the room, a mannequin head wears a wig shaped like a coiled dragon. It's clear someone's been here, working, studying, copying. You're not alone. In the corner sits a woman, elegant poised, sipping something dark from a porcelain cup. She glances up only briefly, then back at the sketchbook in her lap. She's drawing. Fast. Fluid. You peek over her shoulder. It's a wig you recognize from a party 2 nights ago, a towering silver confection worn by the Countess de Celeste. But here, it is already reproduced with notes in the margin spiral base, double frame hidden braid cage. A servant enters silently and hands her a folded letter. She tucks it beneath her corset without blinking. She is not just a guest. She is a spy, a fashion one. Historians still argue whether these wig spies were officially employed or simply gossip mongers with good memory and sharper pencils. Some say nobles hired tailors and servants to attend public gatherings and report on the latest styles, every curl, every pin, every plume. Others believe entire wigs were stolen from dressing rooms to be reverse-engineered in secret. You pass a table where a valet carefully unwraps a box labeled sample fibers, Hôtel de Valenciennes. Inside are strands of powdered hair. He holds them up to the light, comparing their stiffness and tint to a swatch on a card labeled Royal Mix number 14. His brow furrows. He makes a note. You wonder briefly if that sample was collected legally. But in this world, possession was 9/10 of reputation. A wig worn by a duchess today could be copied and restyled for a merchant's daughter by tomorrow morning. And while nobles scoffed at lower imitators, they paid very close attention to what was being imitated and how quickly. You enter another room. This one smaller. Secretive. Lined with pinned sketches. Secret recipes, even faded diagrams of wig mechanisms. One illustration shows a hidden pulley system used to lower a feather display mid-conversation. Another reveals a hinge beneath a powdered curl that opens into a hidden locket. Beneath it, a note stolen at Ambassador's Ball 1783. There are stories, some confirmed, some whispered, of wigs fitted with listening tubes, allowing nobles to eavesdrop in crowded salons. Others concealed messages in hollow ringlets passed between conspirators at royal banquets. But the most common kind of spy wasn't a tailor or valet. It was a jealous cousin. You pass a diary open on a carved side table. The page reads, "Marie's wig last night reached at least 3 fingers above regulation. She says it was a gift from Madame Rigaud, but I know the style. It was seen in Lyon first. She's a thief. I shall report her to Maman at once." Sibling sabotage and noble tattling were as common as powdered lace. Families feuded over curls. A misplaced ribbon could trigger weeks of petty duels. One infamous duel was fought entirely in wig form, with each party commissioning a satirical hairstyle to mock the other. The results were wide. You sit beside a long window and gaze out into the starlit gardens. You can almost imagine the meetings under moonlight by fountains behind hedges, where secrets were traded, wigs examined, rivals sketched in silhouette. Because in this world, style was currency and information was everything. A note slipped into the right hand, at the right moment, could reveal not only what a duchess wore to supper, but who styled it, what scent was used, and how tightly the internal brace was wired. Armed with this, a noble could show up 2 days later wearing a better version. And if the original wearer saw it, she'd smile and die inside. But she'd never say a word. Because this was a war waged not in swords but subtlety. Victory wasn't declared, it was admired. The scent of powder and secrecy fades as you turn another corner deeper into the manor's quiet. The marble cools beneath your feet, and the candlelight flickers lower like breath held just before a storm. Because now, dear listener, we enter the beginning of the end. This is where the wigs begin to tremble. You step into a drawing room that feels different, less polished, more aware of itself. The portraits here are newer and oddly restrained. The curls are smaller, the feathers subdued, and the eyes, they no longer gaze with smug approval. They flicker with doubt. This is the start of the anti-wig backlash. Yes, it was bound to happen. You can only stack hair so high before the foundation underneath begins to crack. And in the late 1780s, that foundation was economic, social, and very, very angry. You move quietly past a low table scattered with pamphlets. Satirical cartoons of powdered nobles with literal scaffolding around their heads. titles like The Kingdom of Hot Air and Madame la Meringue. The drawings are crude, the jokes biting. One shows a noblewoman's wig so tall it knocks over a church steeple. Another depicts a powdered duke crushed beneath his own hair. The public mood has shifted. And the wigs, they're no longer admired. They're targets. Historians still debate whether this backlash was spontaneous or orchestrated. Some say it emerged from Enlightenment thinkers pushing for rationality and restraint. Others argue it was an inevitable explosion of frustration as commoners watched aristocrats parade through crumbling towns wearing miniature ships and ivory towers on their heads. You stop at a corner display, an original copy of a pamphlet titled La Vérité Poudrée, The Powdered Truth. Inside are essays claiming wigs rot the brain, stifle the soul, and trap ideas beneath perfume and vanity. One passage reads, "How can a man think clearly with scaffolding upon his skull? What air reaches the mind through a fog of flour and feathers?" A rhetorical question, but a sharp one. You imagine now a dinner in Paris, 1788. A countess arrives late, her wig barely styled, only a modest ribbon in back. Gasps ripple, whispers swirl, not because she's unkempt, but because she's making a statement. The powdered silence says she's one of them now. The thinkers, the skeptics, the cautiously fashionable. You walk past a dressing table where an abandoned wig rests. It's still tall, still powdered, but only lightly. The combs are missing. The curls slightly undone. A ghost of a past elegance already softening under the weight of change. In the mirror, you see your reflection again. But this time, no fantasy tower rises from your head. Just your own hair unadorned. And for the first time, it feels appropriate. Outside this room, the world is shifting. The streets are louder. The markets lean harder. Bread is short. Taxes are long, and people are tired of watching elegance float above their heads like smoke from a fire they can't escape. A satirical flyer is tacked to the nearby wall. Eat powder or eat bread? That was the question of the day. Even inside, court cracks begin to show. Marie Antoinette, once known for her mile-high wigs, is said to have toned things down. Some whisper she wears her real hair now. Others say it's a decoy and her real wig waits in a velvet box. Either way, the message is clear. Visibility has become danger. You step into a darker hallway. Fewer lights, lower ceilings. The mood turns somber. There's a single chair in the middle of the room, a dusty wig stand beside it empty. And then softly you hear it. A snip. The unmistakable sound of scissors. You approach a door slightly ajar. Inside, a young nobleman sits, hands shaking, as his valet carefully shears away his curls. Not out of fashion, out of fear. He can no longer afford to be recognized in the street. The powder that once marked him as elite now marks him as vulnerable. He says nothing. Just watches in the mirror as he becomes smaller, safer, anonymous. You step back, because this is the final message of the backlash. The wigs, once tools of performance, now carry the wrong script. The joke has curdled, the structure has collapsed. What once made you noble now makes you a target. And yet, even as the towers fall, you can't help but feel a twinge of sadness. Not for the vanity, but for the beauty, the artistry, the sheer audacity of hair worn like armor. Soon these rooms will be empty, and the powder will settle. The silence deepens as you move through the next doorway. No more music, no more murmurs behind fans. Only the slow creak of the wooden floorboards and the sound of revolution breathing in through every cracked window pane. Because now finally we arrive at the moment when the wigs don't just tilt, they fall. This is the age of the revolution. And for the towering hairstyles of French aristocracy, it's more than a fashion shift. It's an execution. Literally. You find yourself standing in a cold room with stone walls dimly lit by high, narrow windows. It smells of paper wax and the iron tang of something heavier. At the far end, a mannequin stands draped not in silk or lace, but in a plain muslin shift. Upon its head sits nothing. No wig. No powder. No plume. Just bare scalp and the phantom shape of everything that used to be. The revolutionaries didn't just discard wigs, they targeted them. The towering coiffures that once screamed status now whispered decadence. To wear one during the terror was to flirt with accusation, to risk denunciation for aristocratic display. and that was often just enough for the blade. You move closer to a bulletin board where notices of the period are pinned, decrees banning excessive dress declarations on the equality of appearance. One reads, "Let no head rise above the other save through merit not powder." Another features a crude sketch of a noble's head and wig falling together into a basket labeled Justice. You pass through a heavy red curtain into a chamber of memory. Wigs are laid out here not in display, but in repose. Long forgotten pieces arranged like museum artifacts on dark velvet. One is scorched, another missing its feathers. A third is so large it nearly grazes the ceiling, its base cracked from neglect. Each has a note, not the name of its wearer, but the date it was last seen in public. Historians still argue whether the wigs fell out of use overnight or in stages. Some say nobles continued wearing toned-down versions in secret like whispered defiance. Others claim that the wigs were burned en masse in the streets along with other trappings of privilege. Either way, the effect was the same. By 1794, the powdered head was a relic. You stand before a tall glass case containing what may have been one of the final public wigs, modest by court standards, but still structured, powdered, and upright. The label beneath it reads, "Confiscated at a wedding, owner vanished." Outside, the streets are noisy again, but with a different kind of noise. You hear the thud of marching boots, the bark of slogans, the clamor of metal on stone. A world no longer concerned with ribbons and ringlets, but with equality. Hair is worn short now, natural, sober, revolutionary. You step out into a mock-up of a revolutionary barber shop. Gone are the padded chairs and perfumed bowls. Everything is utilitarian. A young man has his curls clipped short while reading aloud from Rousseau. Another dumps a basket of old wigs into a crate marked for reclamation. There's no mourning here, only urgency. But among the flames of change you catch something strange. A footman, you think, walking quickly with something wrapped in linen. He glances around, then slips through a side door. You follow at a distance, curious. He enters a hidden chamber. Quiet, secretive. He unwraps the linen. It's a wig. Tall, powdered, beautiful. He doesn't wear it. He doesn't touch it. He simply looks at it for a moment, then rewraps it gently. Because while the world outside roars with revolution inside somewhere, there are still those who remember what once was, who still measure greatness in inches of elevation, who still believe that something this foolish could be that magnificent. You turn and leave the memory of powdered grandeur flickering behind your eyes like candlelight catching on glass, because the wigs didn't just vanish. They hid and waited. You leave the shadows of revolution behind, stepping now into a different kind of room, neither a ballroom nor a salon, but something oddly cozy, familiar. The kind of room where velvet has been replaced by velvet wallpaper, and where the candles are imitation powered by a discreet wire. Because now we travel beyond the fall into the strange afterlife of the aristocratic wig. The part where powdered towers, once feared and revered, are no longer statements of power but props, decorations, even punchlines. This is the age of transformation from high hair to Halloween. You find yourself in a dusty little shop, shelves cluttered with odds and ends, paper masks, velvet capes, plastic scepters, and yes, wigs, all sorts, hanging from hooks, stacked in baskets, some synthetic, some faded with time, most styled not for elegance but for effect. One wig stands out, a monstrous white puff of synthetic curls with glitter woven through. A tag dangles from its base, Marie Antoinette costume foam core, do not iron. The price $14.99. And there it is. You walk down the aisle and notice more like it cartoonish recreations of once glorious designs. Wigs now worn by children at school plays, by partygoers at New Year's, by film extras in powdered parody. It's not disrespect exactly, but the tone has shifted. The awe is gone. The wigs now serve comedy, not command. Historians still argue whether this evolution was inevitable or tragic. Some say that once fashion leaves function, it becomes theater. Others believe the mockery was earned, that such excess deserved to be remembered as absurd. Regardless, the transformation stuck. You exit the costume shop and wander through a small local museum. There's a glass case featuring one original 18th century wig, slightly browned the powder, long since vanished, but the structure still intact. Beside it, a video plays of a modern fashion show, where models strut down a runway with satirical wigs 3 feet tall, shaped like cakes or chandeliers. Art imitates history and then exaggerates it. You take a seat in a quiet corner of the museum where a timeline is mounted on the wall. 1770, wig height reaches cultural peak. 1789, French Revolution begins. 1830, wigs disappear from mainstream fashion. 1920s, wigs reappear in cabarets. 1960s, revival in camp performance and drag culture. 2000s, Halloween aisle regular. Wigs, it seems, never truly vanish. They just change venues. You picture a little girl in 1998 wearing a pink wig to a school dance, laughing as the elastic chin strap bounces against her neck. She doesn't know who Madame du Barry was, but she is experiencing something adjacent, something whimsical, ridiculous, larger than life, a shadow of the original purpose. You stroll now into a rehearsal space where actors are practicing a farce. One wears an exaggerated white wig with visible wire poking through. Another has added a plastic bird perched atop her curls. The director claps and shouts, "Bigger, make it wobble more." And so it wobbles, like memory, like myth. But even amid the laughter, you feel something else. Not sadness, not exactly. Tenderness, maybe. Because even as the wigs are parodied, they're also being preserved, echoed, replayed. A partygoer in 2023 might not understand the political connotations of blue powder, or why a feather on the right side meant ambition. But they still know one thing, that the moment you place something towering and powdered on your head, you become someone else. That transformation, no matter how silly, still holds power. You step outside now into a quiet city street, where shadows stretch long beneath shop signs and taxi lights. You glance into a window and catch your reflection again. And for just a moment, you imagine it. A little extra height. A touch of powder, the echo of a fan snapping open behind you, and the feeling absurd, undeniable, that you might just be ready to enter a salon where everyone knows your name and your wig's name too. The path is quiet now. The wind has softened, the candlelight flickers with less urgency, and even your own footsteps seem gentler, as if this moment, this final stretch, knows you've walked far enough. Not in miles, but in time. From powdered triumph to theatrical parody. From whispered envy to silent closets. But before we rest, before the powder fully settles, there's one more truth to explore. The question that lingers through every curl and curl of history's hair. Why did they do it? Why build towers on their heads? Why reach for the sky when the ground beneath them was already gold? You step into a final room, round and domed like the inside of a snow globe. There are no wigs here, no ribbons, no scented powders, just light, soft, warm golden, and a series of portraits unframed and gently glowing. Not the portraits of nobles, but of people looking up. A child staring at the wig of a passing countess. A young valet craning his neck toward the feathered silhouette of his mistress. A servant holding a mirror at chin height, watching someone else's reflection tower above him. Even a rival courtier, lips pursed, glancing sideways and up, always up. Because that, in the end, is what it was about. Looking up, in a world that demanded order, precision, hierarchy. What better way to show your place than by elevating yourself beyond reach? The wig wasn't just a decoration. It was a declaration. A ladder made of hair. A private ambition turned public height. Historians still argue whether it was hubris or habit, performance or politics. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe people just wanted to feel taller. You sit for a while beneath the dome. Around you, soft wind whispers through invisible curtains. You imagine the sound of powdered wigs brushing past one another in candlelit corridors, the quiet rustle of crinolines, the muted protest of whalebone supports holding the impossible aloft. And in that stillness, you think of how we do the same today. Not with wigs, perhaps, but with symbols, with filters and posture, with shoes that add height, profiles that add polish, and stories we tell to place ourselves just a little closer to the light. The wigs are gone. The powder's been swept. But the desire, still here. Somewhere a designer is sketching a hairstyle for a red carpet. Somewhere a child is twisting bedsheets into a cape. Somewhere someone adds an extra inch to their profile photo, not because they must, but because they can. Because to rise above even just a little has always meant something, and maybe always will. You rise from your seat and take one last look around the room. No more portraits, no more curls, just a quiet golden stillness. A soft place where elevation doesn't need scaffolding. Just memory. And now we descend slowly, gently into rest. Let everything soften now. Let your thoughts stretch out like ribbon in candlelight, uncoiling gently into stillness. The corridors of Versailles fade behind you. The powdered silhouettes dissolve into golden dust. And the wigs, those strange, magnificent towers, bow their final farewell. You're not walking anymore. You're drifting. Each breath slower, deeper, each blink longer. The quiet wraps around you like silk. Imagine now a quiet chamber your own. A room without court, without competition. No lace, no lists, no pressure to perform. Just you, a low chair, a heavy blanket, the sound of a gentle wind nudging velvet drapes. A space where no one measures your height, where your worth isn't curled or powdered or perfumed. Just you. Just breath. The candles have burned low, their flames steady now. The music, if it's still playing, is more echo than melody. You feel yourself melting into the quiet, the day's edges dissolving like sugar in warm tea. And in your mind's eye, a single ribbon slips free from a long-forgotten wig, carried off by the wind, up past memory, past story, past meaning. And then gone. You don't need to hold on anymore. The journey is over. Close your eyes. Let yourself feel weightless. Because here now, in this quiet space between history and sleep, you've finally let the towers go. And in their place, you rise.